Good afternoon, Knowlton colleagues, Columbus Foundation guests. My name is Ryan Vogel, and I'm here to speak to you not about lessons from the past. Mike Cadwell caught that in the announcements this morning. I'm sure some marketing that went out about this event mentioned that originally my ARTA proposal was a little bit different, and I'm going to speak about that in a minute, but it's actually changed since then, or a long time ago, really. So originally I was more interested in kind of comparing Mayan civilizations, ancient civilizations, to contemporary civilizations and cities in Belize, because some of those ancient civilizations had huge populations in the millions, and they were happening thousands of years ago, and they were sustaining their food, their transportation, they had roads, they had really self-sufficient societies there, and I was kind of interested in looking at that from an urban planning perspective, but I did not. What I did do, I will get to in a bit. A little bit about me. I'm a dual degree graduate student. I'm a master's student here, and I'm also a master's student across the river in the School of Environment and Natural Resources. So people ask me, what am I studying? I'm getting 2 master's degrees right now, and I tell them urban forest planning, because in 1 degree I'm studying forestry, and 1 I'm studying planning, so that's what I call it. What is my study on? How did my study come about? It started with a class I took earlier this year. It was an international development studio with Kim Burton and Santina Contreras, and we were talking, the whole course was on Belize, and we had these 2 clientele that were based in Belize, and the whole class, mostly graduate students, was split up into 5 different teams, and we were looking at different aspects in Belize City, which is not the capital city, but is the largest city in Belize. And we were going to be preparing these reports and submitting them to our clientele. My group did a pretty good job. We got an outstanding, everyone in my group got an outstanding graduate student project award for our work, and that was kind of what spurred the idea to apply for an ARTA grant to continue this work a bit. When I was looking at the ARTA program, I had a couple goals. 1, I wanted to follow up on the work that we just did as a class. I think it's a lot more personal to meet with clientele in person. Before that, we were speaking to them through email mostly. I think we tried Skyping and it never really worked with our clients in Belize, but we never actually met them. We were doing all this work all semester, 25 students for 4 months, but we never really knew who we were working for, and we never had a chance to really talk to them ever. It was all through email, through our professors, which was very limited. And also, even then, we submitted all these reports to them at the end of the semester. We don't know what happened to it. We don't know if they read it. We don't know if they liked it, what they didn't like. I mean, it's really difficult when you're working with clientele that are pretty far out of the country and you're trying to submit these pretty big documents to them and trying to get feedback from them. The second thing I wanted to do, I wanted to work with this organization, the Belize Association of Planners. In the United States, we have something called the APA, the American Planners Association. It's a huge organization with hundreds of thousands, I don't know, tens of thousands, at least thousands of members of planners across the country. It's a big professional society here in the United States and maybe abroad too. In Belize, the APA is not there, so they have this. This is their APA, but they're very small. I'll give you an example. I'll tell you more about Belize as a country in a bit, but to give you an example, the BAP has like less than 10 members, compared to the APA here, which has like I said, thousands and thousands of members. So they're a very small organization, and I wanted to learn more about them and kind of see how they do planning in this country and how I could help in a certain way. If you've never heard of what an externship is, maybe you know what an internship is. A lot of us have to do internships. In the MCRP program, we all have to do internships, where we work for a company locally, probably, and we end up working for them for an extended period of time, hundreds of hours, full-time, certain days a week, or full-time during the breaks. Whatever it is, we end up staying with this company for years and doing a lot of work and really kind of getting into the company. We're not a technical employee, but we're an intern and we're learning a lot and helping them a lot. An externship is a much shorter program or project where you're working for a company in the same way, but you're trying to hit it real hard for a very brief amount of time. So I was just there for 2 weeks. And it made sense when I was speaking to my ARTA project advisor, Kareem Usher, who's from Belize himself, when I was talking about this project, because he said that these clientele in the BAP, they were working on a Belize City master plan at the time. They were contracted by Belize City Council, which is the city government entity there, and to do this master planning. And I have a lot of experience in parks. I worked for the National Park Service and the State Park Service and the County Park Service for a long time. And I've done a lot of different things in parks. I had a lot of experience in that. So I thought maybe I can be helpful. So let me go down there and see what they're doing. Belize is a very, hold on, let me check if these, okay, there we go. Okay, so Belize is a very small country if you've never heard of it. It's south in Central America. It touches Mexico to the north, Guatemala to the west, and I think Guatemala to the south as well, but it's very close to Honduras. And a long time ago, it was settled by these Mayan civilizations, thousands of years ago, way before the Common Era. And then since then, it was taken by Britain back in the 1800s. And then more recently, it gained independence. But I say independence with quotes because even to this day, the Queen of England is in charge of Belize. It's a really weird situation. They're a British Commonwealth where they have their local government leaders and they can make some sort of laws, but they still have report in some kind of dashed line to Britain. And I don't really understand it very much, but it's a kind of interesting situation. So that makes for interesting politics there in terms of like their military and kind of how they make laws. If you'll notice in the center, is there a pointer here? In this gray area here, it's a very different part of the country. You'll notice most of the cities are along the coast. But in here, there's no cities and very few people really live there. Big part of the reason that is, this is what I'm talking about with Guatemala, but part of it too is that, okay, so I had some, Chris, FYI, I had some like kind of animations in here. The animations are not working, so I'm missing some things, but that's fine. I'm gonna work around it. In here, this is all forested area. This is really dense tropical rainforest, and it's also higher elevation. So it's the hardest part to develop. So a lot of people didn't, early settlers didn't develop cities in these areas because it's higher elevation and it's covered in tropical dense rainforest. So that's why people live along the coast where they have access to food and water and lots of other human necessities. And then Guatemala is really interesting because they're actually trying to claim territory over this whole southern part, over all this forest area, this really prime, pristine rainforest. Guatemala claims is theirs. They don't even think Belize owns it. So it's kind of a really interesting, like I said, global political situation because Belize is taking this to the international courts to fight for their right to be there. And Guatemala is a much bigger country with a much bigger military. And from what I hear, there's a lot of hostility along the border. And there's a lot of deforestation happening along the border. Because like I said, Guatemala as a country does not respect that boundary. They believe they own that. If I go back one slide, you can see Belize City is this little tiny thing over here. Like I said, it's not the capital. The capital is inland Belmopan. A big part of the reason the capital is inland is because it's protected from what? Hurricanes. Hurricanes hit this area a lot. They have to deal with it. So if they bring the capital inland, the capital will at least be safe, while Belize City knows all these other cities will be underwater. Belize City, right on the coast, it's a little peninsula. And the population has been growing for quite some time now, and not just the population, but also the amount of space. This little gray area was historic downtown Belize City. And it's still the historic area, but as you can see, it's grown over time and sprawling up and down where the highways are. It doesn't sprawl over here because there's no roads there, but I imagine in a very short time that will change. There's a lot of construction happening and roads everywhere, and if there's a road somewhere, then people can develop it. But right now, there's a big highway going that way, a big highway going that way, so that's where the sprawl is happening. But the city is growing. The corporate boundary of Belize City stops somewhere over here. I don't have it. So a lot of this development is happening outside the city limits. The people live outside the city limits because in some ways it's cheaper and they don't have to follow the city laws, and then they commute into work. I mean, we're familiar with this in this country. Belize City has a lot of issues going on. So in the class project that I did in the International Development Studio, my group in particular was looking at their master plan. And we were analyzing this 2012 master plan that was written, and it talked about all these pretty atrocious things happening in Belize City that the government is not addressing adequately. Because the master plan that was done in 2012 was actually done by an external auditor from out of the country. And they took this third perspective at what's going on in the city. And it was really interesting to kind of hear what they were saying. Here are a couple pictures of downtown Belize City to kind of get a feel for what it looks like. It's really interesting culturally because it's so different than much of Latin America. I've been all around Central and South America for work and for fun, and Belize is very different. Belize being all the way on the eastern coast of Central America, it's actually close, very close physically and also close culturally to the nearby Jamaica, which is an island off the coast in the Caribbean. So it has a lot of Jamaican influence, and then it has a lot of influence from Central America as well, but it's actually the only English-speaking country in Central America. So it's really interesting. If you go to any other countries nearby, they're quite different, in my opinion, than Belize. Here are a couple other things that are going on. Like I said, these are some quotes that I pulled from the master plan about things that are happening in the country. The reason that my class and Knowlton is looking at Belize and the Belize master plan, what can we do to help them and what can we do to guide them? And like I said, the corporate boundary does not encompass the entire city area or the city population. That has certain implications to it. They do not have zoning, and a lot of the buildings in the city proper are not meeting building standards, which makes for really unsafe living conditions for a lot of its residents. So, what about the Belize Association of Planners? I wanted to, when I went there, obviously be an ambassador for Knowlton, Ohio State, and our class, and learn more, and teach them more, and I also wanted to kind of interpret our final work products, my class work products, because we sent them a lot of materials, and I'm not sure exactly how they understood it, or if they wanted to use it. So I wanted to really discuss with them what my class did all semester, and if they think this is valuable or useful to them, and what could be more valuable to them in the future. I also wanted to reassess, I'm going to tell you why I said reassess in a moment, the City Parks program, and then I was going to present my findings to local city council for their involvement, feedback. So this project, or this collaboration between Knowlton and Belize, and these clientele in Belize, started several years ago. Dr. Usher had an international development studio very similar to the one that I took 2 years ago, and their class did kind of very similar, or somewhat similar to what the first speaker in this ARTA session right now is talking about, going out to individual parks and assessing them, taking pictures, measuring them, and documenting what each park has and doesn't. And I was trying to continue and build off of that report that they did 2 years ago. They put in a lot of great work. They looked at a lot of parks. They produced a lot of primary data. They pulled together a lot of secondary data. And they gave some really great ideas. And they submitted them. Some of their findings from the 2017 report. On average, most of the parks, city parks, have 7% canopy cover. If you're not familiar with what that means, to give you an idea, the Oval on campus has a 50% canopy cover, and there's still big kind of open areas where there's not tree cover. But most of these parks, and a lot of people think of parks as having trees. Trees are kind of go with parks, they kind of go hand in hand. But here, that's not the case. A lot of these parks do not have many trees. Most of the parks do not have trash cans. There's a number of parks that do have some sort of trash. So that other 66%, where does their trash go? Ends up all over the floor, washes into the water, ends up everywhere. I mean, you can imagine. Playgrounds, really important to the community, and I'll talk later about why they're so important, but a lot of them do not have any playgrounds, or the playgrounds that they have this actually number is do not have any playgrounds. So 54% don't have any sort of playground equipment whatsoever. A lot of them don't have lighting or seating for people to picnic and eat lunch and whatnot. When the 2017 class, they put these together in like an index, and they scored every park, all the 47 parks, and they found that almost all of them failed their index when they counted, when they measured these different metrics, which is pretty big, pretty amazing. So, what's some feedback that I heard regarding the 2017 study that was done by Knowlton, and why that study was not implemented, why the recommendations were not implemented? One, they submitted a big report. They turned this big report into the clientele in Belize, who handed it over to the city government, and I have a feeling a lot of them did not read all 170 pages. I did, because that's what my job was, kind of. But I imagine a lot of people did not. Some of the recommendations they made cost millions and millions of dollars. They were assessing a parks program that had very little budget to begin with, so making recommendations that are, cost millions of dollars is not feasible for a department that is already really tight on finances. They created a survey idea where they're going to go into the community and survey the people to find out what they want in their parks, but the survey issue is very intense. If someone came up to me and they asked me to do a 30-minute survey, I'm really not interested. A lot of people just don't have time for it. And some of the people down there, they were not interested in doing a 30-minute survey either. So the class in 2017, they never did it. Partly because it was a big task to do all these 30-minute surveys with however many people they wanted. And so, I don't know, that's one thing. And then, I also heard that it was a great class assignment for like a graduate student in a development studio, but it really wasn't that practical to apply or implement in the area. So what did I do when I got there? First, I met with one of the council members. She works for city council. She's the one who oversees the parks department. And I wanted to find out, what are you looking for? What do you need? What can I help with? I also had a chance to meet with some NYU students. This is not related to my work, but I was there, so I kind of hung out with them. They were also working for the BAP while I was there as well, and they were meeting with one of the federal government officers there from the national ministry. So I got to sit down in that meeting. And what I found is that, first I wanted to know, where are these parks across the city? So I spent a lot of time driving around with park staff, kind of find these parks, walking the perimeters of these parks with GPSs and mapping them, because a lot of them they did not have mapped. So I put them all into a geographic information system, and I mapped them for them. And then I found there's a lot of different types of parks they have. I mean, it depends on kind of what they're called. Who owns the land? Is it owned by the federal government? Is it owned by the city government? I said state here, but I mean, remember, I didn't have a different slide here, but the whole country of Belize is about the size of New Jersey, to give you an idea. So Belize is a very small country. So even though I said they call it their state government, it's really their federal government, in my opinion. But they have some parks, some land that's owned by the federal government, some that's owned by the city, and some that's meant for public use, and some that is really not meant for public use. And they don't maintain it to a safe standard where public can use it. And then they have a bunch here at the bottom, which nobody claims responsibility for, but the local residents kind of upkeep it. I also found that there's a lot of mixed information. So I was pulling together information from the 2017 class for Knowlton, from the city council, from the BAP, and none of the information matched up. Some information said there were a certain number of parks, others said less parks, more parks. They all had different names. Some parks had multiple names. Some parks had no name, but there was a park there. There was a lot of discrepancies. Nobody knew in city government how many parks they had, or what they were called, or where they were, or how big they were. There was no one could give me that response. So I started mapping this, and I kind of pulled together, pieced together everything I could, and I found that, if they were to include some of these bigger areas, I mean, they have a lot of land in downtown area that could be considered parkland. They're not maintaining 1,000 acres, that's for sure, but there's a lot of land there that could be parkland. The city council has this goal in their kind of city planning documents that they want everyone to be within a quarter-mile radius of a park. So I looked at that and saw that if they include all those parks that I was included, a lot of them would be. But a lot of them are not included, so a lot of people are not within that kind of radius of the park. I did a survey, a much abbreviated survey. I had 321 responses, and about half of them were done in parks and half of them on the street. And I found that everyone thought parks were dirty, parks were broken, nobody liked being in them. This is what all the people were saying. This is what the local residents believe in general. And this is what the most common feedback I got for what they think should be better. Playgrounds. We heard this at a presentation today, and you saw how few parks had playgrounds. But that's what most of their residents want. And then I was talking about the number of parks. The residents believe there are 11 city parks. The city says there are 35 parks. And then I have a list from other pieces of information that says 56 parks. So no one really knows how many city parks there are. Some ideas for staffing. They only have, the Parks Department in the city has 5 maintenance staff and 11 law enforcement rangers. But all those staff only monitor 3 parks. There are 3 biggest parks in the city. All the other parks never get any maintenance, never get any law enforcement. And if you saw on the last slide, people had concerns about safety. People had concerns about trash and broken infrastructure. Those things are not being addressed because their staff are never visiting those parks. Their staff are only being assigned to 3 parks. So I gave them some ideas how they could keep with their existing staff without increasing their budget at all and reallocate their staff to have more coverage across the park district. There's also a lot of neat ways that they can work with the federal government to kind of get access to that land or educate their local citizens as to which land is city park and which land is not. Because whenever a resident went to a park and they thought, this park is a mess, this is dangerous, who would they blame it on? City government. City government had to deal with all the negative feedback, when a lot of times it wasn't their land, it wasn't their park, but they were getting flack for it. And there's also a lot of possibilities for private businesses sponsoring parks and local residents sponsoring parks. And they've already done that on a small scale, but I think they should formalize it and make it bigger to make use of these kind of free donated volunteer resources. So I presented all this to City Council in a pretty informal way. I mean, everything's kind of informal in Belize. If you've ever been there, they live pretty informal Caribbean kind of lifestyle. It's pretty cool. And while I think individual parks, like they have one major park, their biggest park is right there. They put a ton of resources in. Whenever they get a donation of $1 million or a couple $1 million, a lot of people, when I was doing the survey, they had that feedback that why always put that money into the same park? Every couple years, the city parks department will get a couple $1 million, and guess what happens to that couple $1 million? It always goes into that same one biggest park in the city, and all the other parks will get neglected. So while that one park is really cool, and they might have 150,000 visitors a year, there's a bigger park district and park program that they're not addressing adequately. So I'd like to thank the Knowlton ARTA program for making this possible, the Columbus Foundation, and my advisor for this project, Dr. Usher, the staff that I worked with when I was down in Belize, and some professors that were teaching this International Development Studio, and my advisor here in Knowlton for my thesis. Thank you.